The story is finished. I hope you all are in good health. Here's another super sweet story with a 9 rating. Grab your snacks and drinks, because here we go. I was the villain in a redemption novel, tormenting the sickly sweet heroine for 10 years. When she made a fool of herself, I openly mocked her. For her birthday, I shoved her face into a cake. When she wrote a love letter, I reported her for dating. The once rebellious girl was finally molded into a well-behaved young lady by me. Soon, the true male lead appeared. I handed the well-adjusted heroine over to him. They were a perfect match, leaving no room for me. Later, I tricked her, telling her I was going to buy her osmanthus cakes from Northwood, planning to disappear for good. But 2 years later, I was invited back to the U.S. As soon as I got off the plane, I was pulled into a car. Hey, my dear brother, it's been 2 years. Where are my osmanthus cakes? I opened my eyes, disoriented, still caught in the dream. Willow Hayes pushed the door open. Still not awake? Did you not rest well last night? I instinctively clutched the blanket and said coldly, how did you just walk in? The girl paused. Apologies, she smiled, leaving a cup of hot milk, and then left. I rubbed my head and got out of bed, pouring the milk down the sink without hesitation. The milk was thick and slow to drain. 15-year-old Willow Hayes was already skilled at feigning innocence. At this age, she loved experimenting with her newly developed concoctions. This was a redemption novel set in a wealthy family. Willow Hayes, the heroine, was abused by her parents since childhood, leading to a twisted personality. Yet, she appeared obedient and sweet on the surface. I was the Hayes family's adopted son, her non-biological older brother. When we grew up, we were arranged to live together so I could look after her. The first time we met, she prepared flowers for me, but that night, a venomous snake crawled out of the bouquet. Where did you catch that snake? I asked casually at the breakfast table. Willow Hayes's expression didn't change. She replied calmly, brother, I don't know what you're talking about. She was 4 years younger than me, petite, and blinked innocently as she spoke. I smiled, got up, and brought a pot of soup from the kitchen. Right, you're still young. This soup I made this morning is for you. To replenish your energy, I served her a bowl. Thank you, brother, Willow Hayes said with a sweet smile. Her fair skin, charming eyes, delicate nose, and cherry lips were beautiful even before she fully matured. She had slight nearsightedness from studying and sometimes wore silver-rimmed glasses. I watched her take a spoonful of soup and suddenly chuckled. The glasses suit you well. She paused. Is brother complimenting me? Yes, I said, losing my smile. They make you look very well behaved. Willow Hayes, let me ask you a question. I began. Is soup made from a venomous snake poisonous? The next second, she knocked over her soup bowl. The steaming liquid spilled onto the floor, some splashing on her. I feigned surprise. Oh, how clumsy. Did you get burned? No, Willow Hayes mumbled, biting her lip, seemingly trying to endure something. Thank you, I'm going to change. You can eat by yourself. Then, she stormed upstairs. I sat at the dining table, casually stirring my spoon. Still young, indeed, can't hide anything. She likes experimenting with potions, but doesn't even know that snake soup isn't poisonous. Willow Hayes' school and mine were close. I attended a university, and she attended a university high school, so, we usually went to school together. Hurry up, you're going to be late. I waved at her from the car. Willow Hayes' annoyance flashed across her face for a second, then she reverted to her innocent, well-behaved self. We sat in the back seat, the driver having already raised the partition, so he couldn't see us. I caught a glimpse of Willow Hayes' fading smile in my peripheral vision, and my lips curled slightly. Willow Hayes, I leaned closer and whispered, you're still not skilled enough. Her lips were tightly pressed together. She was probably wondering how I knew her true nature. I pulled out a snake-shaped brooch and tossed it into her hand. You're still young. I smiled. You can't hide your tail. I had awakened the day before meeting Willow Hayes. Through a dream, I saw the entire plot. Since it was a redemption novel, Willow Hayes was abused and mistreated from a young age. A tragic childhood, bullying me, and causing trouble were all standard. Before meeting the male lead, she would turn this family upside down, until the male lead saw through her disguise and rescued her. But coincidentally, I was the current guardian. Any crazy, twisted behavior was simply treated as disobedience. If a child was always in a bad mood, it was probably an act. A good spanking would fix it. The next day, Willow Hayes' gaze towards me changed. It was like a predator cautiously observing its prey, ready to strike. "Come eat," I said, still smiling gently. "Willow, that soup yesterday was quite an accident. I've decided not to cook anymore." "Don't look at me so warily. You're not afraid of snakes," she scoffed, sitting down. I continued to stare at her and smile. "I'm not afraid of anything, really." Willow Hayes showed no expression. "Then I'll try one by one to see what you're afraid of." "All right." I lowered my eyes and suddenly said something irrelevant. "When I was in the orphanage, snakes, centipedes, cockroaches, slugs, everything was commonplace on my bed. Your family has been very kind to me. I haven't seen bugs in a long time. It's a good opportunity for you to see if I'm still afraid of them." Mr. and Mrs. Hayes were very busy. Their marriage was an arranged one, two distant hearts under one roof, both prioritizing their own interests. Willow Hayes was one of their few shared interests, and I was the one they trusted to take care of her. Therefore, I wasn't surprised when I received a call from Willow Hayes' homeroom teacher. "Hello, is this Willow Hayes' brother?" What surprised me was the teacher's earnest tone. "This child beat a classmate so badly they're in the hospital. The school leadership is involved, and she'll be disciplined." Honestly, Willow Hayes was very good at pretending. Since childhood, she had been an honor student, praised by teachers and classmates as gentle, mature, and steady. Even if this little viper genuinely disliked someone and poisoned them to break out in a rash, she was never caught. But this time, the nature of the situation was different. "Why did you assault your classmate?" In the office, only Willow Hayes remained. The classmate she beat had already been sent to the hospital. I saw his photo, bruised and swollen, his body even worse. The girl, who grew up with strict discipline, had mastered self-defense. These injuries clearly showed intent to harm. The homeroom teacher slammed her hand on the table. "Do you realize you could have killed someone if you had hit them harder?" Willow Hayes didn't move, just glanced at us expressionlessly. That gaze sent a chill down my spine. It was a look I had never seen before. The teacher was about to continue her outburst, but the next second, I stood up. My actions were faster than my thoughts. "Teacher, let me speak with Willow alone. There must be a misunderstanding. Our Willow isn't a violent girl." "Why did you hit someone?" This was the third time I had asked her this question. Willow Hayes still didn't speak, turning her head coolly to look outside, indicating no communication. I was furious with this rebellious girl. "Not going to talk, huh? Then do whatever you want. I'm leaving." "You'd better hope you survive your parents." Mr. and Mrs. Hayes were extremely strict with her. Always being first in class was the minimum expectation, not to mention adhering to laws and regulations. Any slight displeasure would result in Willow Hayes being beaten senseless, without mercy. I rubbed my forehead, silently thinking, why hasn't she learned her lesson yet? "Are you worried about me?" Willow Hayes suddenly spoke, looking up at me, her expression innocent. "Shouldn't you be wishing I'd die?" I paused. Although that was true, she was only 15, having grown up with such an upbringing. It was impressive she could even pretend to be a good student. "If I truly wished you dead, I would have told your parents long ago." I sighed. "Besides, you haven't thrown any more poisonous insects into my room, have you?" The next day, I took Willow Hayes to school again. The homeroom teacher was still fuming, and her anger spilled over to me. "What exactly happened?" Willow Hayes said. "I won't apologize." "What about her parents? Why is it always you? What good are you? That classmate is still receiving IN4 in the hospital." Willow Hayes's hand suddenly clenched into a fist. I noticed and took her hand, stroking it reassuringly. I didn't notice that her entire body stiffened. "Teacher, you should be thankful he's just on IN4 now," I said, smiling, but pushing a USB drive across the table with my hand. Otherwise, if it were me, I might have crippled this classmate for life. The USB drive contained a recording made by a female classmate who witnessed the entire incident. After school, Willow Hayes stayed behind for cleanup duty and was bothered by that classmate. "Oh, Miss High and Mighty, are you finally willing to clean today? We were just talking about how you, who have no parents, were born to be beaten with cleaning tools." The Hayes couple kept a low profile. Not only did they not send Willow Hayes to a private school, but they also never made an appearance. The clothes they gave her were old, and the tasks they set were extremely strict. Failure to complete them resulted in a beating. Over time, rumors spread at school that she had no parents. Being beaten was Willow Hayes' sore spot. Finally, the homeroom teacher's face flushed red and green. I simply held Willow Hayes' hand and coldly stated, I demand that your classmate and her parents publicly apologize to Willow Hayes. Don't say I didn't warn you. Our Hayes family is wealthy, we keep a low profile, but we hold grudges. Ethan. Willow Hayes knocked on my door. I didn't turn around. Come in. What is it? She held several white roses still dewy with moisture. She stammered a bit. The roses in the garden bloomed. I picked some for you to put in your room's vase. I raised an eyebrow, turning to look at her. The young girl placed the flowers in the vase. The white flowers were very beautiful. Why aren't you calling me brother anymore? I suddenly asked. When you first arrived, you called me brother constantly. Willow Hayes looked very flustered. I smiled again. And why isn't there a poisonous snake hidden in today's flowers? Stop harming the snakes in the garden so much. The snakes must be quite miserable from all your torment. The girl didn't apologize. The newly replaced roses in the room, the steaming hot milk on the dining table, and even a black card that mysteriously appeared in my bag were all her ways of making amends. Keep it yourself, I said, tossing the black card onto the desk. Your parents only gave it to you. What would they think if they saw it mysteriously appear on me? Willow Hayes looked up at me slightly, pursed her lips, and looked very well behaved. I sighed. I haven't held a grudge against you for what happened before, and I'm not saying I'm apologizing. The teenage girl was always contradicting herself, stammering a little as she spoke, adorably haughty. After saying that, she left another remark. You don't buy any nice clothes. You don't even look like a college student. I smiled wryly. So, that afternoon, I went to the mall. Just as I was finishing up my shopping, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was a handsome man, not stunning, but somehow captivating. Hello, he said, his smile carrying a hint of appraisal. Excuse me, sir, how has my heroin been raised? Here, take it back. I returned home with a pile of shopping bags and tossed the black card onto my desk. Willow Hayes didn't take it. Instead, she looked up at my spoils of war behind me. You, a male college student, can shop this much? I raised an eyebrow. Are you worried about the money? She opened her eyes, her tone suddenly lowering. You didn't bring a bodyguard. If you couldn't carry it all, you could have brought someone to help you. How did you know I didn't bring a bodyguard? Willow Hayes paused. I couldn't help but chuckle and ruffled her hair. Then next time, when you go shopping, take me with you to help carry things. The girl's face flushed, and she turned her head, saying stiffly, we'll see about that. Willow Hayes was actually just a child who was loved properly. How bad could she really be? The next day, I received a call from the homeroom teacher. After learning Willow Hayes's true identity, she was noticeably more polite. The previous misunderstanding, I've already explained to that classmate's parents. After negotiation, we've decided to issue a public apology to Willow Hayes at today's flag-raising ceremony. Do you have time to bring Mr. and Mrs. Hayes to watch? Willow Hayes was beside me at the time, listening dismissively. I smiled.